The transmission came without warning. Every screen on Earth, every device capable of receiving a signal, lit up simultaneously with the same message. The Galactic Council had spoken, and their words would ignite a fire that would consume civilizations. Captain Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of the orbital defense station when the message arrived. His coffee mug shattered on the floor as he read the decree. Humanity, the message stated, was now classified as a slave species under Galactic Law Article 742. Effective immediately, all humans were property of the Zendari Empire. Resistance would result in planetary sterilization. Jake's hands trembled, not from fear, but from rage that burned hotter than any star. Around him, his crew stood frozen, their faces shifting from shock to something far more dangerous. The communications officer, Lisa Grant, was the first to break the silence. Her voice came out as a whisper that somehow carried the weight of 7 billion souls. They can't do this, but they had. The Zendari fleet was already entering Earth's solar system. 300 warships, each the size of a small city, bearing down on a planet that had only recently achieved faster-than-light travel. By galactic standards, humanity was an infant. By human standards, the Zendari had just made the worst mistake in their 3,000-year history. Jake activated the emergency channel that connected every military installation, every government, every resistance cell that Earth had built in secret. The channel they had created the day they learned they weren't alone in the universe. The channel they had hoped never to use. All stations, this is Morrison. Execute protocol reckoning. The response was immediate. Across Earth, across the lunar colonies, across the mining stations on Mars, humanity began to move. Not in panic, not in surrender, but with the cold precision of a species that had spent 10,000 years perfecting the art of war. Admiral Kate Hughes received the order at the Naval Command deep beneath the Colorado Mountains. She had been waiting for something like this. Humanity had been observing the galaxy for 2 decades, watching from the shadows, learning. What they learned had prepared them for this moment. The galaxy was old, complacent, and had forgotten what it meant to fight for survival. Humanity had never forgotten. Kate's fingers flew across the console, unlocking systems that officially didn't exist. The stealth fleet, 200 ships built in the shadow of Jupiter's moons, powered up their reactors. Each vessel was equipped with weapons that violated 17 different galactic conventions that assumed everyone played by the same rules. Humans didn't play by rules. They played to win. On the Zendari flagship, Commander Vex the Lore reviewed the human planet with satisfaction. Another primitive world brought into the fold. The humans would make excellent laborers. Their endurance was remarkable, their adaptability noted. They would serve the Empire well. His tactical officer interrupted his thoughts. "Commander, we're detecting unusual energy signatures from the planet." Vex waved a dismissive appendage. "Primitive fusion reactors, no doubt. Proceed with orbital positioning." The tactical officer's voice rose in pitch, a sign of distress in his species. "Commander, those signatures are moving. They're accelerating toward our formation." Vex's confidence cracked. On screen. The view screen showed something impossible. Human ships. Dozens of them emerging from behind their moon. But these weren't the crude vessels they had observed earlier. These were predators, sleek and deadly, moving with purpose. "Shields up, weapons hot, all ships defensive formation," Vex shouted. But he was too slow. Humanity had been planning this response for years, waiting for someone to give them a reason. Today, the Zendari had given them that reason. The first human ship reached weapons range and fired. The Zendari shields, designed to withstand conventional plasma weapons, meant nothing against the kinetic penetrators that humanity had perfected. Simple physics, accelerated to a percentage of light speed. The Zendari had forgotten that sometimes the old ways were the best ways. The lead Zendari warship exploded, torn apart by weapons that cost almost nothing to produce but were devastating in their simplicity. Vex watched in horror as 3 more of his ships died in the opening seconds. These weren't scared primitives begging for mercy. These were warriors who had been insulted, and they were here to make a point written in fire and blood. Part 2. The battle for Earth's orbit lasted 6 hours. By the end, the Zendari fleet was scattered debris drifting in the black. Not a single human ship was lost. Admiral Kate Hughes stood in the command center, watching the tactical display with grim satisfaction. This was just the beginning. "Ma'am, incoming transmission from the Galactic Council," her communications officer reported. Kate smiled without humor. "Put them through." The holographic display shimmered, revealing the council chambers. 12 species, representatives of the major galactic powers, stared at her with expressions ranging from shock to fear. The council speaker, A crystalline being named Aethon spoke first. Admiral Hughes, the Galactic Council demands an explanation for this unprovoked attack on Zendari vessels. Kate's smile vanished. Her voice when she spoke carried the cold fury of an entire species. Unprovoked? You declared my people slaves. You entered our system with a fleet intent on subjugation. You threatened us with extinction if we resisted. And now you have the audacity to call our defense unprovoked? Aethon's crystalline form flickered, a sign of discomfort. The law is clear. Species below Class 4 technological status can be designated for integration. It is for the greater good of galactic civilization. Your law, Kate said, her voice dropping to a deadly whisper, means nothing to us. We didn't agree to it. We didn't sign your treaties.
We don't recognize your authority.
And here's what's going to happen next. Every species in this galaxy is going to learn what happens when you threaten humanity. The council chamber erupted in voices, but Kate cut the transmission. She had said everything that needed to be said. Now it was time for action. Across Earth's military networks, orders flowed like water. The stealth fleet that had just annihilated the Zendari force was only the tip of the spear. Humanity had prepared for first contact in ways the galaxy couldn't imagine. They had built not just weapons, but an entire war machine designed around one principle: overwhelming, unstoppable force. Colonel Ryan Beck commanded the assault carrier Vengeance, leading a strike force toward the Zendari home system. His mission was simple: make them understand. His ship carried 3,000 Marines, each one a volunteer who had watched the Council's declaration with the same burning rage that now drove them across the stars. "Colonel, we're approaching the first Zendari colony," his navigator announced. "Population 12 million. Ryan studied the tactical display. The colony was heavily defended, but the Zendari still thought in terms of conventional warfare. They had shields, plasma weapons, defensive satellites, all designed to stop threats they understood. "Deploy the swarm," Ryan ordered. From the Vengeance's launch bays, 10,000 microdrones streaked toward the colony. Each one was no larger than a fist, powered by a fusion cell and equipped with a shaped charge. The Zendari defenses tried to respond, but how do you stop 10,000 targets, each one moving independently, each one smart enough to avoid incoming fire? The drones didn't target the colony itself. They targeted the orbital defenses, the communication arrays, the military installations. Within 30 minutes, the colony was defenseless, its military infrastructure reduced to scrap, not a single civilian casualty. Ryan opened a channel to the colony. "This is Colonel Ryan Beck of the Earth Defense Forces. Your council declared us slaves. We're here to deliver a message. Surrender your military assets, and you'll be treated with the respect you denied us. Resist, and we'll show you what humanity does to slavers." The colony governor appeared on screen, all four of his eyes wide with terror. "We surrender. Please, we surrender." "Smart choice," Ryan said. "Now tell your council what happened here. Tell them that humanity is coming, and we're not stopping until every chain in this galaxy is broken." The message spread like wildfire. Humanity, the species the galaxy had dismissed as primitive, was carving a path of destruction through Zendari space, but it wasn't mindless violence. Every strike was surgical, precise. Military targets were destroyed, but civilians were spared. Humanity wasn't interested in genocide. They were interested in justice. On the Zendari homeworld, Emperor Drax watched his empire crumble. In 3 days, humanity had destroyed 47 military installations, captured 12 colonies, and sent his fleets running in terror. His generals stood before him, offering excuses and strategies that all sounded like variations of surrender. "How is this possible?" Drax demanded. "They're primitives. They barely achieved light speed." His chief military advisor, General Crane, pulled up tactical data. "My Emperor, we underestimated them catastrophically. Their technology isn't advanced by our standards, but their application is brilliant. They use kinetic weapons that bypass our shields. They use swarm tactics that overwhelm our defenses, and their ships are faster and more maneuverable than anything we've encountered." "Then stop them," Drax hissed. "We can't," Crane admitted. "They're not fighting a war of conquest. They're fighting a war of punishment. Every system we defend, they bypass. Every fleet we gather, they avoid. They strike where we're weak, and they're teaching the entire galaxy that the old powers can be defeated." Drax's scales paled. "What do they want?" "An apology would be a start," a new voice said. Every Zendari in the room spun toward the source. Standing in the Emperor's throne room, having somehow bypassed every security measure, was a human. She was small by Zendari standards, wearing strange armor that seemed to absorb light. In her hands, she held a weapon that hummed with barely contained energy. "I'm Major Claire Watson," she said calmly. "And I'm here to make you an offer. Renounce your claim on humanity. Publicly apologize to Earth. Release every species currently held under Article 742. Do this and we'll stop. Refuse and we'll dismantle your empire piece by piece until there's nothing left but a cautionary tale." Drax tried to signal his guards, but they were already unconscious, dropped by tranquilizer rounds before they could even raise their weapons. Claire smiled at his shocked expression. "We've been planning this since the day we learned about your council. We've infiltrated your government, your military, your society. We know everything about you. And right now there are 500 human operatives on your homeworld, all waiting for my signal. If I don't check in every hour, they start dismantling your infrastructure. So what's it going to be, Emperor?" Drax looked into Claire's eyes and saw something that terrified him more than any weapon. He saw certainty. This human wasn't bluffing. She wasn't negotiating. She was telling him how this ended, and he had only two choices, the easy way or the hard way. "I'll make the announcement," Drax said quietly. Claire nodded. "Smart. You'll do it within the hour, and you'll mean every word. Because if we think you're playing games, we won't come back to talk. We'll come back to finish this." She turned and walked out of the throne room, moving with the confidence of someone who knew no one would dare stop her. As she disappeared into the shadows, Drax realized something that would reshape galactic politics forever. Humanity wasn't the strongest species, they weren't the most advanced, but they were the most dangerous, because they understood something the old powers had forgotten. Sometimes the most primitive weapon is the most effective, and sometimes the scariest thing in the universe is someone who refuses to accept defeat. Part 3. The Galactic Council convened an emergency session 3 days after Emperor Drax's humiliating surrender. The holographic chamber was filled with representatives from 47 species, all watching the human delegation with a mixture of fear and fascination. Earth had sent 5 representatives, led by Ambassador Daniel Cross, a former military commander who had been chosen specifically for his ability to intimidate without saying a word. Daniel stood before the council, his hands clasped behind his back, his expression neutral. He waited as the various species whispered and argued among themselves, their alien languages creating a cacophony of sound. Finally, Council Speaker Aethon called for order. "Ambassador Cross, the Council recognizes Earth's right to self-defense," Aethon began, his crystalline voice resonating through the chamber. "However, your species' response has been deemed disproportionate. 32 Zendari military installations destroyed, 12 colonies occupied, and economic damage estimated at 3 trillion credits. The Council demands reparations and an immediate cessation of hostilities." Daniel let the silence stretch for a long moment before he spoke. When his voice came, it was calm, measured, and absolutely terrifying in its control. "Let me make sure I understand this correctly. You declared my species slaves. You sent a fleet to enforce that declaration with the explicit threat of planetary genocide. And now that we've demonstrated why that was a catastrophic miscalculation, you want us to pay you?" The council chamber erupted in protests, but Daniel continued, his voice rising to cut through the noise. "No, here's what's going to happen. The Galactic Council is going to abolish Article 742. You're going to release every species currently held under that barbaric law. You're going to formally recognize Earth's sovereignty and independence, and you're going to establish a new law that makes slavery in any form a crime against galactic civilization." "This is outrageous," a Volcarian representative shouted, its tentacles writhing in agitation. "You cannot dictate terms to the Council." "You're one species against an entire galaxy." Daniel smiled, and it wasn't a friendly expression.
"You're right. We're one species."
"But we're the species that just humiliated the Zendari Empire in less than a week. We're the species that has operatives in every major government in this galaxy. We're the species that has been watching, learning, and preparing for this moment for 2 decades. So when I say we can dictate terms, I'm not threatening. I'm stating a fact." He pulled out a data crystal and placed it on the table before him. This contains evidence of 14 different slave operations currently running in council space, species being held in violation of their rights, their freedom, their dignity. If the council doesn't act, Earth will. Anathon's crystalline form dimmed, a sign of deep distress. "Ambassador Cross, you're asking us to overturn 3,000 years of established law. The economic implications alone would destabilize half the galaxy." "Then I suggest you start planning for that destabilization," Daniel replied. "Because Earth isn't going away, and we're not going to pretend your laws matter to us. You had a choice. You could have approached us as equals. You could have offered trade, friendship, cooperation. Instead, you tried to enslave us. Now you get to live with the consequences. Back on Earth, President Jennifer Black watched the council proceedings from the White House Situation Room. Around her, military advisors and diplomats monitored dozens of screens showing the deployment of human forces across the galaxy. Operation Freedom, they called it. The systematic liberation of every enslaved species they could find. Madam President, we're receiving reports from the strike team at the Quillen mining colonies, General Marcus Stone announced. 3,000 beings freed, mostly Endorian refugees who were captured during the border wars. They're requesting transport to neutral space. Jennifer nodded. Granted. And make sure every news outlet in the galaxy knows what we found there. I want the council squirming. Her chief of staff, Paul Martinez, looked up from his tablet. Ma'am, we're getting pushback from some of our own people. Critics are saying we're overextending, that we're picking fights we can't win. The UN General Assembly is divided. Jennifer turned to him, her expression hard. Paul, our species was declared property, not citizens of a lesser status. Not primitives who needed guidance, property. If we don't draw a line here, if we don't make it absolutely clear that humanity will not tolerate this, then we deserve whatever happens to us. Tell the critics they're welcome to their opinions, but this is happening. On the far side of the galaxy, Lieutenant Commander Sam Rivers led a rescue operation that would become legendary in human military history. His team had infiltrated a Corthan processing facility where captured species were being evaluated for labor assignments. Intelligence suggested over 10,000 beings were held there, including 300 humans who had been on deep space exploration missions when the Zendari Declaration came through. Sam and his 12-person team moved through the facility like shadows, their stealth suits bending light around them. They had trained for this kind of operation for years, running simulations that now seemed prophetic. The facility's security was designed to keep prisoners in, not elite soldiers out. Team 2, secure the control center, Sam whispered into his comm. Team 3, power systems. We need a clean blackout before we start moving prisoners. The operation went like clockwork. Within 15 minutes, the facility was dark, its automated defenses offline, its guards disoriented and neutralized with non-lethal weapons. Sam reached the main detention area and began opening cells, his translator speaking in dozens of languages. Stay calm. We're from Earth. We're here to get you out. A Dracorian female, her scales scarred from hard labor, stared at him with disbelief. Earth? The humans? We heard what you did to the Zendari. We thought it was propaganda. Sam helped her out of the cell. It's not propaganda. It's a promise. No one enslaves anyone anymore. Not on our watch. As they evacuated the prisoners, Sam found the human captives. They were in rough shape, but alive. A woman named Beth Cooper, a xenobiologist who had been studying asteroid formations when she was captured, grabbed his arm. How bad is it back home? She asked. Sam grinned. Home's fine. Better than fine. We're kicking the galaxy's teeth in, and we're just getting started. The evacuation took 4 hours. By the time Corthan security forces arrived, Sam and his team were gone, along with every prisoner. All that remained was a message painted on the facility's main wall. Earth remembers. Earth responds. Earth doesn't forgive. The message resonated across the galaxy. Within days, 6 more species contacted Earth seeking alliance. They had been oppressed, marginalized, or threatened by the Council's major powers. Now they saw an opportunity. Humanity wasn't just fighting for themselves. They were fighting for the principle that no species should be subjected to another. Ambassador Daniel Cross returned to the council chambers with a proposal that would change everything. He was accompanied now by representatives from 8 other species, all of them standing united. Speaker Athon, we present the Free Species Compact, Daniel announced. A mutual defense treaty between Earth and any species that agrees to fundamental principles of freedom and self-determination. We currently have 12 signatories, and the list is growing. Aethon's form pulsed with what might have been anger. You're creating a rival power block. This will fracture galactic unity. Unity? Daniel laughed, the sound bitter. You call this unity? Half the species in this chamber are terrified of the other half. Your council maintains order through fear and economic coercion. That's not unity. That's tyranny with a polite face. He gestured to the representatives with him. These species are joining us because they believe in something better. A galaxy where strength doesn't give you the right to oppress, where technology doesn't make you superior, where every sentient being has the right to chart their own destiny. A Taraxian elder, her voice quavering with age but strong with conviction, stepped forward. For 300 years my people have paid tribute to avoid being classified as available labor. 300 years of living in fear. Earth offered us protection, asking nothing in return but our friendship. That is the kind of galaxy we wish to live in. The council session dissolved into chaos. Some species supported the human proposal, others denounced it as dangerous radicalism, but everyone understood that the galaxy had changed. Humanity had arrived, and they weren't playing by the old rules. On the Vengeance, Colonel Ryan Beck received new orders. The Corthan sovereignty had refused to release their labor assets, claiming that their cultural practices were protected under council law. Earth's response was swift and uncompromising. All ships, this is Beck. Target is the Corthan Administrative Complex on Primus 4. Rules of engagement: disable, don't destroy. We're sending a message, not committing genocide, but make sure that message is loud enough to hear across the galaxy. The strike force jumped into Corthan space with the precision of a surgical knife. They encountered resistance, but it was token at best. The Corthan had built their defenses assuming they'd never be challenged. That assumption cost them dearly. Within 2 hours, their administrative complex was a smoldering ruin, its computer systems wiped, its military capability neutralized, and once again, not a single civilian casualty. Humanity was proving they could be ruthless without being cruel, deadly without being indiscriminate. Part 4 of the war, if it could be called that, lasted 43 days. By the end of the 6th week, 15 major galactic powers had agreed to Earth's terms. Article 742 was abolished. Every enslaved species was in the process of being freed. The Galactic Council had been restructured to include representation from minor species, and humanity had established itself as a force that could not be ignored, threatened, or subjugated. But the cost was becoming apparent. Lieutenant Eva Martinez stood in the medical bay of the orbital station Hope, watching doctors work on wounded soldiers. The Ythran Confederation had fought back harder than expected, and while humanity had won, the victory came with blood. "How many?" Captain Jake Morrison asked from behind her. Eva didn't turn around. 47 dead, 112 wounded. Could have been worse. Jake moved to stand beside her. Every one of them knew what they were signing up for. When the council made that declaration, every soldier in every branch volunteered for this. We all knew some of us wouldn't come home. "Doesn't make it easier," Ava said quietly. Jake nodded. "No, it doesn't. But it makes it necessary. Every person who died in this fight died so that future generations wouldn't have to. They died so that no human, no being anywhere in this galaxy would ever have to fear waking up and finding out they'd been declared property." The medical bay doors opened, and President Jennifer Black entered, flanked by security. She had traveled to the orbital station specifically to meet with the wounded, to honor the dead. Eva and Jake saluted, but Jennifer waved them off. "At ease. I'm not here as your commander-in-chief. I'm here as someone who sent you into harm's way, and I need to look you in the eye while doing it." She moved through the bay, stopping at each bed, speaking with each wounded soldier. When she reached a young Marine named Danny Foster, barely 19 years old and missing his left arm, she knelt beside his bed. "How are you feeling, soldier?" Danny tried to smile. "Been better, ma'am, but I'd do it again. What we're doing out here, it matters." Jennifer's eyes glistened with tears she refused to let fall. "It matters more than you know. The species we've freed, they're calling you heroes. They're calling all of humanity heroes. But I know the truth. You're not heroes. You're people who were pushed into an impossible situation and decided to push back. And I will spend the rest of my life making sure your sacrifice wasn't wasted." Back on Earth, the public was divided. News channels ran constant coverage of the conflict, showing the liberation of enslaved populations alongside the costs in human lives. Protests erupted in major cities, some supporting the military action, others condemning it as imperialism disguised as justice. Professor Nathan Gray, a historian at Harvard, appeared on a global broadcast to provide context. "What we're witnessing is unprecedented in human history. For the first time, our species isn't fighting for territory, resources, or ideology. We're fighting for a principle that transcends our own interests. The question isn't whether this is justified. The question is whether we're prepared for what comes next." That question became urgent when the hegemony made their move. The hegemony was a coalition of the 3 most powerful species in the galaxy, and they had watched Earth's rise with growing alarm. They convened a summit on the neutral world of Varos Prime, and they invited Ambassador Daniel Cross to attend. Daniel knew it was a trap, but he went anyway. Earth's intelligence network had spent weeks analyzing hegemony communications, and they believed they understood the play. The hegemony was going to offer a deal: cease military operations, accept a junior partnership in galactic affairs, and avoid a conflict that would devastate both sides. The The summit was held in a massive crystal dome that overlooked Veros Prime's purple oceans. 3 hegemony leaders sat across from Daniel: High Commander Vrex of the Krylon, Matriarch Sela of the Vardanai, and Technocrat Prime Orin of the Machina Collective. Vrex spoke first, his voice a deep rumble. Ambassador Cross, the hegemony recognizes Earth's military capabilities. You've proven yourselves formidable. But you must understand the larger context. Galactic civilization is built on certain principles: order, hierarchy, stability. What you're proposing threatens all of that. Daniel leaned back in his chair, his expression unreadable. High Commander, with respect, your civilization is built on exploitation. The strong dominate the weak, the advanced subjugate the primitive. You call it order, we call it oppression. Matriarch Sela's 4 eyes narrowed. Pretty words from a species that has existed in galactic space for less than a generation. You speak of oppression, yet your own history is filled with war, slavery, and genocide. Do not presume to lecture us on morality. You're absolutely right, Daniel said, surprising everyone in the room. Humanity's history is a nightmare. We've committed atrocities that shame us to this day. But here's the difference. We learned. We evolved. We recognized our mistakes, and we changed. You, on the other hand, have spent 3,000 years perfecting systems that ensure the powerful stay powerful and the weak stay subjugated. That's not civilization. That's stagnation. Technocrat Prime Orin, a being that was more machine than organic, spoke in a synthesized voice. You're being offered a choice, Ambassador. Join the hegemony as an equal partner. Receive access to advanced technology, trade routes, diplomatic protection, or continue your current path and face the combined might of species that have ruled this galaxy for millennia. Daniel stood up, placing his hands on the table. Let me make something very clear. Earth will never join the hegemony. We will never accept a system that denies freedom to sentient beings. And if you choose to threaten us, if you choose to attack us, you will learn the same lesson the Zindari learned. Humanity doesn't fight wars to achieve victory. We fight wars to ensure our enemies never threaten us again. He walked toward the exit, then paused and turned back. You have 3 days to withdraw all hegemony forces from systems where freed species are being relocated. After that, we'll consider any hegemony presence in those systems an act of aggression. Choose wisely. The summit ended in failure, exactly as both sides had expected. The real question now was whether the hegemony would back down or double down. Earth's military prepared for both scenarios. Admiral Kate Hughes stood in the command center, reviewing deployment orders that would commit Earth's entire fleet to a potential war with the hegemony. It was a gamble, but everything about humanity's rise had been a gamble. Ma'am, we're receiving a coded transmission from deep space, her communications officer announced. It's from the Sylvani. Kate's heart skipped. The Sylvani were a neutral species, observers who had watched galactic affairs for over 5,000 years without taking sides. If they were making contact, something significant was about to happen. The transmission revealed itself as a holographic message from Elder Mora, the Sylvani spiritual leader. The ancient being looked tired, her luminous eyes dimmed with age. Humanity, you have awakened something in this galaxy that has slept for too long.
The hegemony will not yield.
They cannot yield without admitting that their entire civilization is built on a lie. But you have allies you don't know about. Species who have watched and waited for someone strong enough to challenge the old order. When the hegemony moves against you, you will not stand alone. The message ended, leaving Kate with more questions than answers. But one thing was certain. The galaxy was choosing sides, and humanity had become the symbol of something larger than themselves. They had become hope. Colonel Ryan Beck received orders to pull back to defensive positions around Earth's allied systems. The time for offensive operations was over. Now came the hard part, holding the line against an enemy that outnumbered them 50-1. His ship, the Vengeance, took position near the freed Endorian colonies. The refugees there had been given a choice: evacuate to safety or stay and fight for their new freedom. Over half chose to stay, picking up whatever weapons they could find, determined to defend what humanity had given them. Colonel, Andorian ground forces are reporting ready, his tactical officer said. Ryan looked at the display showing the ragtag militia below. They had no training, minimal equipment, but they had something the hegemony had forgotten about: the will to be free. All forces, this is Beck. Stand ready. The hegemony is coming and they're bringing everything they have. But remember what we're fighting for. We're not fighting for Earth. We're fighting for the principle that every being has the right to control their own destiny, and that's worth dying for. Part 5, the Hegemony fleet arrived 6 days later, and it was the largest military force ever assembled in galactic history. 2,000 warships, supported by carrier groups, mobile fortresses, and weapons platforms that could crack planets. They came not just to defeat humanity, but to make an example that would echo through the ages. Admiral Kate Hughes watched them approach on her tactical display, her face calm despite the overwhelming odds. Earth's defense fleet numbered 300 ships. The Free Species Compact had contributed another 200. Against 2,000, the math was simple and brutal. All ships, this is Admiral Hughes. Battle stations, remember your training. We don't need to destroy them. We just need to make them bleed long enough for them to reconsider. The Hegemony broadcast a final ultimatum. Surrender within 1 hour or face total annihilation. Kate didn't bother responding. Instead, she activated a signal that had been prepared for this exact moment. Across the galaxy, in systems the Hegemony thought secure, humanity's secret weapon activated. For months, human operatives and sympathetic aliens had been placing quantum disruptors in Hegemony supply depots, communication relays, and military installations, not to destroy them, but to disable them at precisely the right moment. The Hegemony fleet suddenly went dark. Their long-range communications failed. Their supply line coordination collapsed. Their tactical networks crashed. It would take hours to restore full functionality, but hours were all humanity needed. All ships, attack pattern, Omega. Hit them while they're blind. The human fleet surged forward, moving in perfect coordination. They targeted command ships first, using their superior maneuverability to slip past Hegemony defenses. Kinetic penetrators, plasma torpedoes, and quantum missiles tore into the massive fleet, causing chaos and confusion. But the Hegemony weren't helpless. As their systems came back online, they began to respond with devastating firepower. The human frigate Dallas exploded under concentrated plasma fire. The destroyer Olympus lost propulsion and began tumbling into the engagement zone. Casualties mounted on both sides, turning space into a graveyard of twisted metal and frozen bodies. On the Vengeance, Colonel Ryan Beck led his Marine forces in a desperate boarding action against the Hegemony carrier. They breached the hull using explosive charges, pouring into the enemy ship with the fury of soldiers who knew they were fighting for more than just victory. "Secure the reactor level," Ryan shouted over the combat channel. "If we can take it offline, that's one less carrier launching fighters." The fight through the Hegemony ship was brutal. Hand-to-hand combat in zero gravity, pulse rifles lighting up corridors, grenades detonating in closed spaces. Ryan's forces took heavy casualties, but they pushed forward with relentless determination. They reached the reactor chamber and planted charges, then fought their way back to their breach point. The carrier's reactor went critical as Ryan's team cleared the blast radius. One more Hegemony ship neutralized, but at a cost of 18 Marines who didn't make it out. Back on Earth, President Jennifer Black watched the battle unfold from the Situation Room, her hands gripping the edge of the command table. Every lost ship was a tragedy. Every fallen soldier a name she would remember for the rest of her life. "Madam President, we're receiving reports from across the galaxy," Paul Martinez announced. 37 species have declared support for Earth. The Sylvani just destroyed a Hegemony supply convoy. The Dracorians are engaging Hegemony forces at the Kepler Junction. "Ma'am, it's happening. The galaxy is rising up." Jennifer felt tears streaming down her face, but her voice remained steady. "Tell Admiral Hughes that help is on the way. Tell her to hold the line just a little longer." The tide turned in the 8th hour of battle. Reinforcements arrived from across the galaxy. Ships bearing the colors of dozens of species who had decided that freedom was worth fighting for. The Hegemony fleet, already damaged and disorganized, suddenly found itself surrounded. High Commander Vrex, watching his fleet being systematically dismantled, made a decision that would end his career but save his species. He ordered a general retreat. The Hegemony fleet jumped to hyperspace, leaving behind over 300 destroyed ships and thousands of dead. The silence after the battle was deafening. Kate Hughes stood on the bridge of her flagship, looking at the debris field that stretched for millions of kilometers. They had won, but the cost was staggering. 147 human ships destroyed, over 20,000 dead. Allied casualties were even higher, but they had won. The Galactic Council convened 3 days later, this time with a very different tone. The Hegemony representatives were notably subdued. The minor species who had joined Earth's cause were given seats at the table. And humanity, the species that had been declared slaves just weeks ago, now sat at the center of galactic power. Ambassador Daniel Cross stood before the Reformed Council, his voice carrying the weight of all that had been sacrificed. This council was built on the principle that might makes right, that the strong had the authority to dominate the weak. Today we offer a new principle. that every sentient being has inherent rights that cannot be taken away. That freedom is not granted by the powerful, but exists as a fundamental truth. He pulled out a document physically printed on paper in the old human tradition. This is the Galactic Charter of Rights. It establishes that no species can be enslaved, subjugated, or denied self-determination. It creates an enforcement mechanism to ensure these rights are protected. And it transforms this council from an instrument of control into a forum for cooperation. Speaker Aethon, his crystalline form glowing with what might have been hope, spoke softly. "And if we refuse?" Daniel smiled, but there was no humor in it. "Then Earth and its allies will withdraw from galactic civilization entirely. We'll build our own society based on our own principles. And when your system inevitably collapses under the weight of its own corruption, we'll be here, ready to help build something better from the ashes." The vote was unanimous. The charter passed into galactic law, backed by the threat of human military force and the moral authority they had earned through blood and sacrifice. 6 months later, Lieutenant Eva Martinez stood on the surface of Andor Prime, watching as the last refugee camp was closed. The freed slaves had homes now, communities rebuilt with Earth's help. Children played in streets that had been labor camps just months ago. It wasn't perfect, but it was a start. Captain Jake Morrison joined her, his arm still in a sling from injuries sustained during the battle. "What are you thinking about?" Eva smiled. "About how one transmission changed everything. About how humanity went from being threatened with extinction to reshaping galactic civilization. About how scared we should be that it could all fall apart." Jake nodded. "It probably will. Parts of it, anyway. Freedom is messy. It's complicated. It requires constant work. But it's worth it." They stood in silence, watching the sun set over a world that had been given a second chance. Across the galaxy, similar scenes were playing out. Species learning to be free. Societies rebuilding themselves without the chains of oppression. And humanity standing watch, ready to defend what they had fought so hard to create. In the end, the galaxy had tried to make humanity slaves. Instead, humanity had made the galaxy free. Not through conquest, but through the simple refusal to accept that some beings were meant to be ruled by others. They had proven that even a young species, even a primitive civilization by galactic standards, could change the universe if they were willing to fight for principles that mattered. The scars would remain, the memories of those who fell would never fade. But their sacrifice had purchased something priceless. A galaxy where freedom was not a privilege granted by the powerful, but a right defended by the brave. Humanity had been declared slaves that day. The galaxy didn't live through Earth's fury, but it did survive to see Earth's mercy, and in that mercy, it found hope for a better future.